Okay, let us continue with the third part of today. So up to now, we set two big typologies that we want to discuss: the vertical typology, TPS, MIS, DSS, ESS. Some specific cases like GDSS and GIS. And then we said, well, there's another way of looking at these types of enterprise systems. That's the horizontal way. So we discussed ERP systems, enterprise resource planning systems, which originated from material requirements planning, MRP systems. And then we will also briefly discuss supply chain management systems and CRM systems, customer relationship management systems. These ERP systems, as said before, what they want to do is they want to integrate everything. They want to cover everything from Porter's value chain. What we saw was that as the years progressed, that some companies, some suppliers, they said, well, covering everything is really challenging. So we will still focus not only on a specific industry, but we will also still focus on big chunks within that Porter's value chain. And there are two which are very, very prominent today. These are the supply chain management systems that focus on inbound and outbound logistics. So having deliveries arriving at your company and making sure that if you need to do deliveries or outgoing products, that you take care of them. And customer relationship management systems, which focus on everything related to your customers. So those CRM systems, they focus on the functionalities regarding the placing of orders, making sure that if certain deliveries need to take place at a certain date in order to make sure that your production schedule is running fine, they will look at those interactions as well. They will look at your inventory levels, make sure that, okay, what's the risk that we run out of stock? What does it mean for the timing of placing an order, of getting products inflowing, and the same for the delivery of orders. One of the reasons why I insist on mentioning it here as well is because if well designed, these systems allow you to also really go into other business models. For instance, the vendor management inventory system, VMI, is something that you can only enable, that you can only run in your company if you have well-designed ERP or often supply chain management systems. Because what those supply chain management systems, for instance, allow you to do is, as I said before, some of those systems, they don't only integrate information within one company, they go inter-organizational. They also make connections with outside organizations. And so vendor management inventory systems are those systems that allow you to share the data from your inventory with your suppliers. And so if you have good information on your inventory, if you have well up-to-date information in your SCM system, that vendor, your supplier, can look into your inventory and they can say, well, you make certain agreements, you make a service level agreement, you agree on certain KPIs, where you say, well, from these products, I always want to have at least 100 items. And you just make it happen. And you deliver whenever necessary. And then if you deliver your products, you invoice me and so on. But you take care of it. I commit to not use more than 20 units per day, for instance. But on the other hand, you make sure that at least on every moment in time, we have 100 items of this product. And then, of course, that vendor that will look into your inventory. And on the one hand, you as an organization, you are free of worries for that aspect. On the other hand, your supplier will also get the freedom to organize how they deliver their products. They might study the pattern of usage of those products that you have, and they might maybe already produce upfront. Or they might say, well, we have 10 clients. We have big ones, we have small ones, and we see that for this company, okay, we need to make sure that the minimum amount is 100, but these amounts, 100 is very small, so whenever it goes to 110, 105, we just deliver. But for other clients, they require much bigger amounts, so there we will maybe already deliver upfront. We will create a much higher margin of safety. Whatever you want. But these vendor management inventory systems, they are enabled by supply chain management systems. If you do not have the accurate information on your warehousing, and if you do not have the adequate link between your warehousing system and those external partners, you cannot just work with that system. And so today there are companies who are using that system. You also have just-in-time systems. Just-in-time system is basically, maybe I can ask a question. It's a well-known system. What does it mean? It's a management system that occurs in logistics quite a lot. What does it mean? The title actually already explains it. What does it mean, a just-in-time system? Zero inventory. That's the philosophy about it. And just-in-time means I want to have my products delivered at my door just in time. Not too early, not too late, just in time. And the implication is indeed, as you rightfully mentioned, because you do not want to have any inventory. Of course, you might criticize this and you might say, this is not always possible. Indeed, you see that these systems, they only arrive in certain industries. For instance, again, in the car manufacturing industry, you see these kind of things. Why? Because you have a few dominant companies in the industry, car producing companies. They work with a lot of small suppliers. Often those suppliers, they are dependent from those large producing companies. Often it's even their only customer. So they're fully reliant on that. And then you can have these not always very balanced management systems where basically as a supplier, you are forced to provide just in time the products to your client. Again, that might be a feasible management system in certain industries, but you can only realize that if you have well-designed information flows. It originated from the Toyota production system, and then it was in the philosophy of reducing muda, reducing weight, so making sure that you don't have inventory, that you don't do movements of goods which are not good, that you make sure the quality of your goods is always okay, that you continuously optimize. But these systems, how well proven they are, how nice benefits they might have, they are only possible if you have a good information exchange between the different parties, for instance, by means of a supply chain system. If you have a just-in-time system, you need to give access to your supplier to your production schedule. You need to very clearly communicate, on this day, we will need these types of products on this time of hour. And so the management idea is very nice, but to realize it in practice, you need these kind of supply chain systems. You can even go beyond business models for a specific organization and look at the more global supply chains as well. Because what we see in industries where those companies, they are not well connected, they are not exchanging information, what you see is that they actually operate in a push-based model. So they will produce a product and then they will try to sell it. Unless you are in very specific industries where you really have tailor-made products, then maybe they might wait until you order. But traditionally speaking, it's a push-based model. You create products and you try to push them upwards in the supply chain. If you have better information, exchange, you go to a pool-based model. A pool-based model where you as company, you can actually get information about the market. You can get information about your clients, and you can base your production on actual customer demand. You try to predict what is the seasonality of a product. Sometimes in certain periods, if you produce drinks, then there might be a peak during the summer period, and you anticipate already, we see the orders from our clients, we see the market trends, so we will go already to increase our production. So we will really base our production based on the demand. What it also allows you to do is to avoid the bullwhip effect. The bullwhip effect is one of the most tricky problems in supply chain management, in logistics. Again, maybe one of you knows the bullwhip effect. What is it? Yes. Yeah, exactly. So summarizing what your colleague said, the bullwhip effect is the idea that, or the phenomenon that when there's a small change in customer behavior, for instance, a 10% increase in demand, well, smaller, it is a small but significant change, that it escalates the more you go upwards, upstream in the supply chain, up to the actual producers, where you would expect, logically speaking, that if there's a 10% increase in demand, that they also increase their production with 10%, but that we see that in the end, they will increase their production 30, 40%, and that all the intermediary players, they will increase their inventory levels. That's not something what you want. And so it's visualized a little bit here, where you see, well, you have a full supply chain. If you are the manufacturer, this part of the supply chain is the upstream part. This part of the supply chain is the downstream part. So you go from manufacturer, distributor, retailer, customer, but you also rely on an upstream part where your suppliers are. And the way how they often explain it, and a very good book to read it, is Peter Senge, MIT management professor, who explains it in one of his books, The Fifth Discipline, how important that information exchange between companies is. And he uses a story which they also often, well, by coincidence, use to explain it to students, which is called the beer game. And it's a very good illustration of this bullwhip effect, because what they say is to students, well, okay, guys, you know what the business industry is. You have consumers, and basically the beer goes from the brewery to the wholesaler to the retailer and customer. That's the flow of the product. The product flows from the left side, so the upstream side, to the downstream side. Now, the information in that industry goes in the opposite direction, because you have the consumers who order their beers at the retailer, and then the retailer goes to the wholesaler goes to the brewery. And to explain, I mean, we don't have the time here, and I know in some years the beer game is actually done in one of your courses, so I don't want to repeat it here. But the conclusions of the game are very important, because what they do is they would split up the students in groups, and they would say, well, you are the retailer, you are the wholesaler, and another group is the brewery. And they say, well, the retailer is confronted with consumer demands, so they get information. Every round in the game, they get the amount of consumers or the amount of orders placed by consumers. And so the retailers get that information based on their inventory and on their information that they have. They need to place orders to the wholesaler, and then those get the information from the retailer. So they need to use all their information to place orders to the brewery and so on. What are the conditions of this game? Well, of course, there are costs. There are costs of keeping an inventory, and there are costs associated with not being able to provide your orders to your customer. There is a lack of information, in the sense that you only have information from your direct consumer. So the retailer has information on the consumer, and the wholesaler has information on the retailer, but not on the consumer, and the brewery only has information on the wholesaler, not on the retailer and the consumer. And there's a bit of delay, meaning that if a retailer places an order with a wholesaler, it takes a few days or a few rounds before it's actually delivered. And what happens is exactly what your colleague says, almost unless people got this explanation, of course, up front. But if you do not inform people up front, the human behavior is always the same, and therefore also organizations, their behaviors is always the same. What happens is, in the game, at a certain point in time, consumer demand increases a little bit. And you see that after a while, retailers are not able to deliver their products anymore, so they will increase their orders. Consumer demand remains high. Retailers, they don't have the products to deliver them. They already ordered products with the wholesaler, but they need to wait until the products arrive. So they again increase their orders and place additional orders. The same happens for the wholesaler, because they get more and more and more higher and higher and higher demands from the retailer. So they do exactly the same behavior. It multiplies there. And the same happens with the brewery, who is confronted with many wholesalers who increase suddenly their demands week after week after week. They see an increased demand, and so they start expanding their production capacity. It takes a few rounds, it takes a few weeks and months to do that, but then after a while they start delivering all their beer. Now, what is typical here is that consumer demands increases with a certain percentage, for instance 10%, and for the rest it remains stable, more or less. But what we see that over time, production capacity and storage, so the number of units that will be stored in the warehouses, will exponentially increase after some time. And that happens all the time. Every time that you play this game. It's even shown that in a lot of cases, the best way to win the game, because of course there is often a prize and a winner to those who minimize the costs and maximize their profits. The secret to winning this game is basically to do nothing. So if you are just in one of those groups, the best way to win the game is just to place the same amount of orders every week. Not to be distracted by the information that you get, and to keep cool, keep calm, and just order every time the same. And that's very counterintuitive, because people are confronted with information, they want to react on it, but because the information is incomplete, because the information is not accurate enough, they do not only take suboptimal decisions, they actually take bad decisions. They harm their company, they harm their own team by doing actions which think are good, but actually have a negative effect. What might be the way to solve this behavior? Basically, yeah, you already pinpoint, very good. Information exchange. What kind of information exchange? What should we do? What kind of? Exactly. So you can fully solve the problem if, for instance, if the brewery would be aware of what actual consumer demand is, which the retailers know, well, then there would be no problem, because then the brewery would be aware, okay, consumer demand has increased with 10%. The reason why all those people in the supply chain are putting so high orders is because they are out of inventory. They did not have the 10% safety stock. The problem here is basically that they did not have sufficient inventory, that they did not foresee this potential change in customer demand. So that they know I need maybe to increase my production capacity, but only with 10%, not with 50, 60, or 200, 300%. And so we don't have the time, but it's a very nice experiment. It always turns out the same, but it's a very nice proof of the need of these systems. Because these systems, supply chain management system, as I said before, it doesn't do more than that in the essence. It allows you to exchange information between different parties in the supply chain. And by doing that, you can actually address one of the most challenging problems in logistics, being that bullwhip effect. Again, the book of Senji in general is a very interesting read, but he explains it very well how it proceeds. And so if you're interested, warmly advise to take a look. I have described it here a little bit if you want to take a closer look at home, but I will not go into details here. But what you see is always the same. So you see a small, and that's why they call it the bullwhip. You see here a small change in customer behavior, and each step more upwards in the supply chain that you go, the higher this increase in orders gets, and it's something that is observed in a lot of industries and in a lot of areas. Yeah. So the things to remember is that the way to win the beer game, to win the logistics game, is to have information, to share information. Holding inventory has a cost, stock breaks have a cost, and if you have uncertainty, well, then either companies will hold more inventory than is required, just to be sure, and that has a cost, or if they do not have that safety inventory, well, they will have or they will be confronted with the fact that small deviations in supply and demand will generate this ripple effect and this bullwhip effect upstream in the supply chain. And the key to winning that then, or to solving that, is to make sure that you have a well-functioning supply chain management system that helps you in providing more accurate information and minimizing overall costs. And I think it's quite logical, or quite makes sense that those supply chain management systems, they really focus on those two areas of Porter's value chain. Yeah. And then the last type of systems within this horizontal typology are the customer relationship management systems, so CRM systems. As the title might already suggest, it focuses on sales and marketing. But it's not a detail because this is about your customers. Without customers, you don't have any kind of value to offer, so you don't have a company. So it's not a detail, it's crucial to know your customer, to make sure that you can do your sales and your marketing in an appropriate way. Just as supply chain management system might replace the inbound, outbound logistics, these systems might replace that functionality, sales and marketing, which is related to the customers. The traditional way to describe CRM systems are systems which cover two areas. On the one hand, they have operational CRM, so they allow you to do the operations, the everyday operations in respect or in relation to your customers, your sales, your call centers, your customer service, even your marketing approaches if you want to sell, not to sell, but to send certain emails if you want to encourage them to make another order because you want to retain them and so on. That's operational CRM, your everyday operations in interaction with your customers. And you also have analytical CRM, which is more like of course, it's not operational, it's not in everyday businesses. It's really taking a look at what's out there and trying to get a 360-degree view of your customer. What are the typical profiles of customers that we have? What is their gender? What's their age? What's the location that they are in? Can we segment them? Maybe we have young technology adept people, and maybe we also have older people who have different interests, or maybe they have different locations, or you can even do this customer lifetime value analysis. The 80-20 rule applies to a lot of situations. Often, sometimes it also happens if you would analyze the customer lifetime value of your customers. Could be that your profit is actually driven only by a small segment of your customers. That maybe 80% of your profits, that they come from 20% of your customers. It's not always applicable, but in a lot of cases, that is a fact. So yeah, then you should try to analyze it. If there are certain customers who are much more profitable than other customers, for you as a manager, it's very interesting to know which are these types of customers, because maybe we want to focus mostly on those customers which we know are very profitable, and those others for which we also need to do 80% of our effort, but they're not so profitable. Maybe we should not focus on them too much, just as an example. So that's what those CRM systems provide you. As I said, the idea is to integrate all the information we have on those customers. Today, that's particularly challenging because with all those devices and all different ways that people can interact with the company, companies have this multi-channel approach. So you can go physically often to a store and talk to a person at the desk. You can also go to their website, or you can also use their app. Maybe there are even other ways to interact with the company. So you have different channels in which people can interact with your company. And ideally, you want to integrate all that information. If you go to the store, and of course, they will also often ask you to have a loyalty card or something like that. The real reason is, of course, that they want to have the data in an integrated way. They want to know, this customer mostly orders via the internet or goes to one of our branches. What is the trajectory of the customer? Is it a loyal customer? Is it a profitable customer? But specifically in these multi-channel environments where we're currently operating, these systems become more and more important because you want to have a full picture, a full overview of your customer. I mean, if you call to an help desk, I guess you probably have the same feeling when you give your customer ID or whatever, and the person in the desk can see, you ordered these products, and this is you, and you are there, and you are calling now already for the third time for the same problem, and that they show that they are aware that that you had already called 2 times, and the steps taken there. Often for a client, it's also a very nice experience to have someone at the other side who has this 360 degrees view, because you can better help your customer. Needless to say, again, if we make the mapping to a CRM system, it's on the sales and marketing area that it focuses. Just to give you a bit more background, typically when I call here ERP actors, actually it's for all enterprise applications that is valid. Once you decide to go ahead with those systems, and of course we will dive much deeper into the system development process next lecture, but once you go ahead with these big enterprise systems, there are typically three important actors that you need to consider. Yeah, you have the ERP vendor. As I said before, you have some dominant companies like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, and of course many others. You have implementers, those companies who say, well, this is software that exists, we will implement it in your company. You have again some well-known names, Accenture, Deloitte, other specialized companies who, as their core business, is implementing software from other companies. For your ERP vendor, if you want to use that software, unless you go for certain open source applications, which we will briefly touch upon in the 5th chapter, but in most of the cases, those ERP software systems, they require you some license costs to pay. But this implementation phase, implementation cost is often more than 60% of the cost. So there is often a significant license cost to pay for these very well advanced systems. But there's also an implementation cost, which is often higher than the merely the license cost. And then, of course, the story does not end. Once it is implemented, you need to deploy it or to maintain it, as they say. So making sure that it's uptime, it's always working, making sure that your security is up to date each and every time, making sure that if some services need to be added, that you maintain your service catalog and so on. And so also there you have companies who specialize into that. You can either do it yourself or to go to a specialized provider like CSC, IBM, EDS, and so on. So you already see from the size, I mean, it covers those systems, they try to encompass everything within your company. Well, often these things are so complex that you even cannot just go to one company, but that you have specialized vendors, specialized implementers, and specialized deployment companies. Yeah. Of course, there will be companies who will say we will both implement and deploy and maintain. Of course, certain ERP vendors say we will also implement. And now we even see a tendency for even ERP software to not only be deployed on-premise, but to go into cloud and to be hosted sometimes by the ERP vendors themselves. Yeah. So again, this is a typology, this is a theoretical overview. In reality, it might be combined in some cases. It's very difficult to get market studies of ERP vendors because, of course, there's also sensitive commercial information with that. 5 years ago, I managed to get some market studies here. If you want to hear, you can see the big players or the dominant players in the different segments of that market. So multinationals, it's clearly that SAP is a market leader, but you see that, for instance, for medium-sized companies, which where of course they were not the pioneers in adopting ERP software. First it were like the multinationals and the big companies, but then afterwards we see that also now SMEs, small medium enterprises, they're also very actively adopting those ERP systems. Well, there we see that it's not necessarily always SAP, which is the biggest one, but for instance Microsoft, and you have other players as well. Yeah. The ERP implementation phases. Again, we will dive deeper into that process in part 3, but typically you have 4 important phases. You have an ex ante evaluation, where you will evaluate upfront what is my business case. Will implementing this ERP software, will it provide value to my company? Is it in alignment with my goals? Then once you have decided that you have a good business case, you go into implementation and testing, where often these 2 things need to happen. So there is software that is working, that is running, but often you need to configure it. And you need to say, which are my products, which are my prices, which are the areas that are working, or you need to customize. It might be that you say, well, here I do not follow the standard behavior of the package. I want to customize it. I want to change it a little bit. You might need to, if you're a big company covering several locations, you might have particular situations in Belgium versus France and versus Germany. In a lot of cases, you might already have systems there. You might want to replace these old systems by the new ERP system. Well, then you need to do some data migration. And of course, you need to train your users before you can actually start using it in practice, which is then the third phase, the go live, where you actually put the system into production. And then the fourth phase, not unimportant, you also have maintenance, where you have the implementation of new updates, new versions, support of users, and also small updates. Yeah. Questions? No? Very good. Then we will go to the last part of today, but I think probably the most important one. I mean, it is important that you know the different types of systems and that you know the characteristics and that you can identify or recognize them. But it's probably even more important that you are aware of the management challenges, issues that are associated with it. First of all, it's important, and I already said it more or less, but I repeat it here. It's important to know that these ERP projects, so they have nicely projected advantages like integration and standardization, but they also have important drawbacks. They are huge and complex, which means that they are extremely encompassing in your organization. They touch upon everything, so everyone will be involved. Every operation of your company will be touched. Processes, people, hardware, software, everything needs to be adapted. It requires advanced skills. It's not easy. You need very experienced people. You need motivated people. It's not trivial. And that means that, recall the chaos report from the Standish group, it requires buy-in. It requires that both people doing the everyday job, the operational people, that they are convinced, that they are seeing that it's relevant, that it's efficient to do these changes, but also that top management makes sure that there's a budget, that they support it, that they have a clear vision, that they know why to do it, and that they don't just regard it as a technological fancy stuff. No, that they really see it as part of the core of the organization. That means huge, complex. That means that they're very risky. A lot of those projects, implementation projects, they require 3 years or more to complete. That's a lot, 3 years. It's even worse in the sense that every so many years, those vendors, they provide an update. You go to the new version. And unlike with your desktop, where it's just press one button, you wait a few minutes and it runs again, there are migration scenarios. You might need a project of 1 or 2 years to upgrade from a previous version of your ERP system to a new version. And you might say, I don't want to do it. Well, contractually, first of all, you might be obliged to do so. So often those ERP vendors, they will force you. You come into a certain vendor lock-in, as they say. You are there, you signed the contract, and once you're there, it's very difficult to escape. All your data is there, all your processes are there, all your people are using it. So you can just not leave it. And contractually speaking, they will also often force you to update. And what's even worse, suppose that you manage not to have that in the contract and you're free to choose your update. Well, even then, you will be forced to do those updates because, like you have on your smartphone or your desktop or whatever, those versions, they have an end of life. End of life means that of a certain while, there will be no bug fixes anymore, ça va, but it also means that there will be no security updates anymore. So however you play it, when you implement ERP or enterprise systems to core in your organization, that means that you are confronted with huge complex projects that are very risky initially when you implement them, and also every so many years when you need to do an update. So that means that despite the very huge and nice advantages of integration and standardization, there are also some horror stories. And I'm not saying you to make this aware, I'm saying this to give you a realistic representation of reality. These days, companies are basically almost forced to have something like an ERP package, so you need to commit to it, but you also need to be aware of the riskiness, of the impact, and that sometimes it goes horribly wrong. There are cases where the implementation of an ERP project that failed have led to the bankruptcy of the company. So this is something where I think that US future managers should be aware of. It's a key project. It's costly, as all IT projects, but also here we have some studies that document that more than 50% of the projects that are carried out experience budget overruns, and that in case you have external vendors, that it's very easy, almost unavoidable to get into a vendor lock-in. You choose for a certain company, Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, whatever, and you are connected to them for longer than the average marriage, because you will be for the rest of the life of the company. these are facts. These are like take or leave. This is objective. That doesn't mean that you do not have some kind of maneuvering. There are certain decisions that you can take, that you must take as a manager with respect to those systems, and we will analyze some of them. And I think those are really crucial. The first decision that you should make often is to do the make or buy decision. A make or buy is something that is traditional in investment decisions, also for non-IT systems, but also when you consider enterprise systems like ERP systems, you can say, well, I will buy the system from an existing vendor, or you might even say, well, no, we will develop it. We said that often you have vendors who provide their software, who sell their software, but there's nothing that prohibits you to say, I won't go into this vendor lock-in with a well-known company. I will create my own ERP system. I hire software engineers, I hire project managers, I hire architects, and we will do it ourselves. What would be your reflections? What are the pros and cons of both decisions? It depends how big the company is, yeah. Very good. Colruyt is one of the few companies in Belgium, of the large retail companies, who developed their own system from logistics until the cashier system. They all developed it themselves, and as you are rightfully so, it's often only possible when you have a big company because they have the resources and they have the skills and they have the manpower. Yeah. Yeah, and they have the plans to maintain it. Yeah. Another consideration is indeed that you might say, we might do it ourselves, but is it then the most cost-effective way? There are people who might argue if you do it yourself, might not be the cheapest choice because you develop it for yourself. But the nice thing of software is that once it is developed, you can share it almost cost-free with everyone else. So here you would do all the setup costs, all the initial costs, but you would only use it for one company. Whereas those ERP vendors, they also develop it only once, but they sell it to hundreds or thousands of companies. So that might also be a very relevant element. Yeah. Anything else? They keep it in-house, yeah, but is that then a benefit? Is it a drawback? Security is debatable in the sense that you could say, well, security these days is such an advanced field that often it helps if you really have the top experts, and if you want to hire them specifically for your company, it's often difficult. But and then the hosting is something else that we will see in one slide, because this really is about the software as such. But okay, very, very, very relevant elements that you mentioned. I've noted down the most pertinent elements that come across in these decisions. First of all, when you have this option of developing the package in-house, you make it yourself. That's the make decision. There's one big advantage that didn't come up in the discussion here, but it is crucial, is that what a lot of companies face is if they say, well, I take an existing software package and apply it to my company, what I will lose is I will lose my what's then called the idiosyncrasy, the uniqueness of our business. Colruyt will indeed say, well, we developed our own software system and it is perfectly aligned with how we work. It's the Colruyt way of doing. It's embedded in their system. So, well, if you make it yourself, you have that possibility. You can actually say, well, we develop it so that it perfectly aligns with our processes, with our competencies. We are very good at making things or delivering things in a very cheap way. It's also their competitive position. They position themselves as a very cost-effective retailer. It allows you to focus on those elements where you think you want to be innovative, and it aligns with your organizational culture. So if you make it yourself, you have some significant advantages that you don't have when you just buy an existing software system. So reaching business IT alignment, where I talked about in the beginning, is much easier to achieve. Because if you have a strange externally developed system, well, the chances that it nicely aligns with your business is very, very low. That implies a very important drawback. Because I said ERP systems, they have two big advantages. Integration, standardization. If you say yourself, I go to the make option, I make it myself, well, then you don't have those best practices. You don't have those standardizations. So you say, basically you say, I know better how to run my business than the other ones. We will go more deeply into that later on, but often that's debatable. Often companies overestimate themselves in that. Another big advantage is that you maintain independence. I already said, well, once you sign a contract with those ERP vendors, you are linked with them for the rest of the duration almost of your company. You will be forced to pay the licenses, to have the updates, and you will not be able to simply exit because all your data, all your processes are there. If you develop it yourself, of course, you do not have that login. There's lock-in. There's nobody externally who can extort you, who can force you, blackmail you, so even to speak, legally speaking, to do certain things, to pay certain amounts. It does not happen. All the knowledge, all the technology is in the company. That also, of course, implies those analyses, they are never black and white. Each benefit is associated with a drawback. Also here, this benefit is associated with a drawback. Because that means, yes, you have all the knowledge, you have all the technology, you're not independent for your software system to someone else. But it also means that you are responsible for it. There's nobody else who will save you if you have a security breach. You are the one to take care of it. If you need to maintain it, you will need to be able to recruit people or to have people who are able to do it. Nobody else will do it for you. And in today's environment where IT skills are very scarce, that is also a strategic element to consider. You can be rest assured that the big companies like the Oracles and the Microsofts of this world, they will find a way to update their systems. The question is, will you, as a small company who develops it yourself, who is not well known, who does not pay or does not have the means to pay exorbitant paychecks, will you have the possibility now and within 10 or 15 years to maintain your system? So that's to be considered. On the other hand, if you say, no, I don't make it myself, I buy it, well, then you have basically a little bit the opposite. That means that well, you can make use of your software vendor and your implementer, who will have a lot of technological experience, knowledge, resources. They have done this tens of times before, so that's a bit a relief. That's a bit that gives confidence. And also that vendor implementator, they will take care of the updates, the follow-up of new technologies. They will take care of that technology. You need to pay, but they will do it. The drawback is then, the other side of the coin is that you will be most probably situated in some kind of a vendor lock-in. They have all the knowledge, they have the technology. It's very important to terminate the contract because what is the alternative? And so these implications are in the long term. It's not just for 1-2 years, it's 10 years and more. Of course, if you buy something, it also means that you take something that has been developed by someone else and you can fine-tune it a little bit here and there. But in the end, the software was developed for a retailer, not for Deleuze, not for Colruyt, not for Carrefour. It was designed for a retailer. So the extent to which you can really fully align business IT alignment is to be seen. Two ways to do that. If you buy the software, you can either say, well, I buy an existing ERP package, and then we will see indeed business IT alignment, not so easy. Or you can still say, well, I will not make it myself. I will buy it, but what I will buy is I will still buy something customly developed. I will still have a software supplier developing my ERP package. But actually, in reality, it much more resembles this one because you still make something custom. You don't do it yourself. You have an external company doing it, but most of the consequences are the same. You will maintain your idiocracy. And so that's That's a that's a best practice. You will not. That's a benefit. You will not have the best practices, but at the same time, you will also be confronted with this vendor lock-in, because then you depend for your custom system that has been specifically developed for you. You're still dependent on an external company. So that's the very first fundamental decision. Do you make or do you buy the software yourself? The second decision is the hosting, the infrastructure. So on the one hand, you have the running of the system, the software itself. Second decision that you need to take is the infrastructure of the hosting. Do you put your servers yourself into your own server rooms and run it there? So you control it, you own it, the data is physically on your premise. Or do you say, no, we will outsource that to an external provider? We see that in the last 5 years, there has been a tremendous shift towards what? More on-premise or outsourced? Outsourced, yes. A lot of companies today, they use Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud. They use those services not for their small hobby projects. They use it for big applications. They even use it for their ERP systems. Whereas these kinds of encompassing software systems, they were the last ones to transfer, because organizations said, that's not something that we trust in the cloud, not having access ourselves. If you have it in-house, there are some benefits, because you are the full control and owner. You know where the systems are. You can actually see them. You can feel them. You control who has access to it. You determine the security and so on. One of the most cited arguments in the discussion is the cost element. However, that's also not clear-cut. There are people who say, well, it's cheaper to outsource it, which is often the motivation to do it. It's cheaper. But there are also people that say, well, it's cheaper in the short term. In the long term, it might still be cheaper to have it yourself. And then, of course, it depends on the size of your company, but also on evolution of technology itself. Nowadays, we see that due to the massive scales of those few very big external hosters, well, they have so big economies of scale that even this argument where a lot of people used to say, well, it's cheaper in the short term, but in the long term, it's still more expensive to outsource. So you could better provide it in-house. Even that argument now is sometimes challenged by people saying, well, those few dominant companies, they're so big scales that they have economies of scales, which even allow you to have it cheaper being hosted externally by an external partner than yourself. Yes. Yes. Exactly. There's a problem in terms of license and vendor lock-in, although usually the story goes that the vendor lock-in is often more strict and fixed on the software level than on the hosting one. Normally, those applications, they run on a fairly standard environment. So they have fairly the same types of servers, Linux servers, and so on. Normally, you could say I switch from Amazon to Google should be doable. Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 You're committed. Yes, although given the fact that they can charge you what you want, indeed they can start cheap and they can increase their prices over time. However, experience shows that, I mean, it's not easy to switch from A to B, but if you want to change, generally speaking, it's considered easier to do that on the level of infrastructure than on the level of software. So if they are really too exorbitant in their behavior, there is still a way out. Particularly here also because we have some, particularly also because you clearly see that although there are some dominant players, there is competition. You have Azure and Amazon, which are clearly the two main ones, and then you have Google on a third, or Alphabet on a third position. But there are some other players as well, and you see that, I mean, they try, it seems as if they behave in a competitive way. At least you don't have only one player, at least there is an alternative. But you're right, to a certain extent, you come into the same scenario with a vendor login, with possibilities of full dependence on the external contractor. And I say it's easier, but it's still a big undertaking. And most companies, they will not like it because it's very tricky. You need to shift from A to B on a certain time. It's very tricky. So most organizations, they will actually not do it or consider it. Yes. We will come to that in a minute. We will come to that in a minute, to a more hybrid approach. We will come to that in a minute. So if you say, okay, I will provide my hosting, my infrastructure myself, you have full control. You hope that in the long term it's cheaper, but of course you are, as your colleague rightfully says, you come back to point number one. You need knowledge and competences yourself. You need to update the infrastructure yourself and so on. Whereas if you go for an external cloud provider, well, you have different players out there, so you can choose. And of course, the responsibilities you share in-house are less. They will provide the competences. They will take care of the security. I mean, by means those infrastructures of Amazon or Google Cloud, you just don't walk in there. I mean, it's super secure. I mean, they have also the resources to make sure that those sites are not accessible, that they are duplicated, that they are very secure. They have the scale that they can be super secure on physical and non-physical elements. So they provide competences and they take care of the infrastructure. They also, and this is a very important benefit, they allow you for rapid upscaling and downscaling. Those big providers, they have huge capacities, and even companies like Netflix, who, if I'm correctly informed, they run their infrastructure on Amazon, and you can imagine like hosting all those video series, streaming them. I mean, the amount of data that you store and that you send is huge. Well, even there is some possibility to have upscaling and downscaling. So there might be more busy periods and less busy periods. Well, those big providers, they allow you that scalability. Suppose that you yourself are such a broadcasting company and you need yourself to make sure that if people during the Christmas holidays and it's bad weather, if they suddenly start streaming much more and you need more servers to cope with that, if you host it in-house, you yourself, you will need to be able to set additional servers into your server rooms. And okay, of course, the videos of Netflix, they will not be stored in their ERP package, but the same logic holds there. Suddenly, if you have an increase of orders, if you have much more business traffic going on, if you have it in-house, you will need to take care of the scalability. Otherwise, if you buy it, the external service provider will do that for you. You can make really standard contracts, a service level agreement where you agree this is the service that we expect from you, 99.9% uptime. These are the prices that we pay per usage, element of usage. So if we use more, then we pay more, but then maybe the unit price goes down and so on. As said, some people argue that in the long term, it's a bit more expensive. In the short term, it would be cheaper, but this is debatable. And of course, the main disadvantage is that you lose control. Officially, in those contracts, for sure, privacy, security, legal things, they are covered. But you still need to trust them. And up to now, there have been no major issues known onto that. But I mean, your data is hosted by someone else. Officially, they should not be able to access it. Often also the data will be encrypted so that even if someone gets physical access, they will not be able to read it. But you can't touch it, you can't see it. And so there needs to be some kind of reliance. There is, for instance, in certain areas of the world, like also in Europe, there are regulations that say that customer data, personal data, needs to be located within, for instance, the European Union. These are regulations. As a company, you need to apply them. Well, if you have your own data centers, it's very easy because you know my data center is in Brussels or in Frankfurt or whatever. if you go to a cloud provider, often these days they will offer you that possibility. They will offer you to say, okay, are there any restrictions where we can put that data? Are we allowed to store it in the United States, or can we only store it in Europe? So there are ways how it's tackled, but still you need to think of it. And of course, you still need to make sure that your provider is reliable and that you trust them with the data. Then, I think this is probably these and the next two slides are probably the most. I think they're probably the most important one of the course, because this is the misconception that most people have, and it's also a disappointment from a lot of people when they work with enterprise systems. But as I said, it's part of this inconvenient truth. So next to the make or buy decision for the software and for the hosting, there is this crucial decision, the decision with relation to the business IT alignment. Why? Because if you take an ERP package, something that exists, and people say it's off the shelf, you take something that exists, you take it off the shelf, you put it into your own company. Well, then we know that, still this business IT problem, it's applicable everywhere. We saw number 2 of CIO's concerns, but it also applies when you have ERP systems. So then you still need to cover that problem as well. But you take something that exists that was not specifically designed for your company, you apply it to your company. So you need to make that match. You have your own processes, you have those which are in the ERP system, and you need to match them. It doesn't work if you just leave it like that. So you have a choice. Either you adapt your processes to that one of the ERP system, or you adapt the ERP processes, you change them, customize them to your own organization's processes. And what do you think would be the best way to proceed? What do you think is the best? Do we adapt our way of working, our processes to the ERP system? Or do we modify the ERP system so that it aligns with our processes? Because, if we want to achieve business IT alignment, we need to make sure that they're aligned. That's a very good consideration. And you already say, indeed, if you take an existing ERP package, you are supposed, or they are supposed to have best practices standards in them. So it might be an argument where you say, well, let's change our own processes because they might be even better, the ones which are than the one we have. So the ERP process might be better than ours. Yes, you are indeed. You could also consider the different ERP vendors that are there or the different variants that they offer, and you could see which one is already the closest to my process. Yeah. Any other reactions? Yes. Sometimes one argument that comes across very often is indeed that people say, well, but changing people, changing processes, it's not so easy. And that's true. It's super, super difficult. So that might be a very good argument where you say, well, let's adapt our software. There are also a lot of managers who say one way or the other phrasings that come down to this point. Listen, we are a retailer or a banker or whatever. We are not a technology company. So the technology needs to follow our business. We are not going to follow the technology. And often at that point, decision has been made and people decide, well, we will change our business to, we will change the ERP system according to the practices that we have in the business. But that's a bit the inconvenient truth, in the sense that there are lots of problems that you introduce at the moment that you start doing that. And I will first list them out, and then we will see in practice a hybrid approach is mostly advised. And that is the slide I would really ask you to remember, not only for the exam, but also afterwards, because I think this will be the thing where you can get most value out of, because it's probably one of the most misconceptions in management of enterprise applications. Because on the one hand, you can say, well, let's adapt the ERP package to our organization. It has a huge advantage because you can say it will be fully aligned with our way of working, our idiosyncrasy, the way how we do things. It will be aligned with our competences, with our competitive position. We are very good at doing this, and if we just apply the standard processes, we might lose our competitive advantage. That's the reasoning that's used. We might not be so innovative and so on. But there are big drawbacks. First of all, of course, you think you know better, and in some cases it is, some cases it is not. So you say, well, those best practices that exist, we will not adopt them. But also it requires customizations, and those are very, very costly. Just like I said with the vendor lock-in, this is not a one-stop game. This is a game that has multiple rounds, multiple years. So the customizations, they have a cost not only in the beginning, but also in each and every update. You make a certain customization to the software, there comes a new version. Well, you will need to check all those customizations again to make sure that they fit into the new version. And that's when often problems arise, where it becomes extremely expensive and people have difficulties in translating those customizations from the old version to the new version. So initially, often it's still doable and people think we're right, but then after a few years, they run into trouble. On the other hand, when you adapt your organization to an ERP package, well, what you then do is you minimize the customizations. So first extent, you will lower the costs. Sometimes people use the term vanilla implementation to say we almost do no or no customizations or only a very few amount of changes to our system. Costs are lower because you will need less time, less resources to do those customizations. You will, in that case, adopt the best practice, but people say, well, but we lose our uniqueness as a company, our way of working, our competitive strategy, our people will be difficult or will not easily adopt those new practices. And that might cause some kind of resistance because they've been doing their job for 20 years like this, and now you're going to tell them to do differently. People don't want that. In general, best practice knowledge on how to deal with this is visualized here in this figure. I didn't invent it myself. It's from Linneke Sneller, who's an expert on ERP systems. And whether you like it or not, this is part of the inconvenient truth. In the sense that whenever you adopt an enterprise package in your organization, it's not a clear-cut thing. It's not black and white. It's not always adapt the ERP system or adapt the organization. It's a mix. It's a hybrid approach, but it's a very strict approach in the sense that when you adopt such package, you should go into a functional fit analysis. Basically meaning you make an index of all the processes that you have in your organization, and for each of them, you will compare your current business process. How do you do it currently in your organization? And you will compare it with the ERP best practice. You will compare them. If you're lucky, they are the same and they fit, and you will replicate the ERP process in your company. If you're unlucky, then you need to make a decision. Then you need to make the decision, will I customize my ERP package or will I adopt my organization? 95 or 98% of the cases, you should go here. Or you should decide not to have an ERP package altogether. Successful ERP packages for the largest amount of processes, they go for this path where they say we will adapt our own processes. We will follow the ERP package. We will not do the customization. There is one exception in the case that you have a competitive advantage on this process. When you say, well, we are unique in a certain extent, and we have a competitive advantage if we compare it to our competitors because this particular thing, how we do payments, this particular thing, how we do our deliveries. That is our competitive advantage, and we cannot just take industry best practice because then our competitive advantage is gone. If you come across those processes and you see, well, no, we do have a competitive advantage here, so we do not want to go to the ERP process, well, then you can customize your ERP package to keep your own process, but only if you're really sure. What we see in practice is that it's very easy for business analysts, for for strategists, for managers, they're very much tempted to say, yeah, this is really the way how we do it. We are unique. Often you are maybe a bit unique or you deviate from the standard, but that does not mean that it's a competitive advantage. Often there are several ways of doing something. There are several ways of doing a payment. The best practice is like it is in the ERP package. So bend a little bit and adopt that practice. Only if you're really sure that the way that you deviate from the best practices give you a competitive advantage, that's the only reason why you should deviate from the best practices. And that's a very hard message to bring, because a lot of managers, a lot of business people, they don't like it, they don't want it, or they don't believe it. The problem is we see it almost in every project where these decisions needs to happen. The more customizations you do, the more costly, the more complex, and not necessarily only in the short term, but mostly in the long term. And so, again, if there's one thing I want you to recall from this lecture, from this course, not only for the exam, but also afterwards, it's this idea. And if you cannot live with the fact that you should adapt your organization to fit this type of processes in the ERP system, that's also fine. But then look for other possibilities. Then maybe it's not up to you to use this ERP process, because the whole goal was standardization and integration. If you are not willing to use those standard practices, basically you are sacrificing 50%, bluntly speaking. 50, of course, it's not 50%, but then you're sacrificing an important benefit of those packages, and then you should not do it. And we see that a lot of projects that fail, it's often because they over-customize. And the problems often only show up a few years later, and then the story is always the same. But we have this thing up and running. We invested millions when it was initiated. Now we have an upgrade. The only thing we ask is to do the same thing as we have done before, and you ask us so many millions again. Well, often the reason is this. Often the reason is you have adapted your ERP package at so many places. Each and every update, you need to revise them again. That's so complex, that's so costly, that it makes the project very costly and failing yet. And I know this is not a nice message to bring, but it's the truth. So if you use an existing package, this is the analysis that you should do. Yeah. Finally, also some other management issues, but kind of less crucial, at least. They're also important, but less crucial. Architectural composition in terms of functionality. Yeah, ERP systems can be developed in full, as we said before, or you can have a best of breed. Like we said, you have the supply chain management system, you have the customer relationship management system. Sometimes companies say, well, we adopt the ERP package, but we really have a very specific way of dealing with our supply chain, which is better covered by this other package. And then they say we will go for a best of breed. We will take the ERP package for 80% of our functionality, but the inbound and outbound logistics, we will plug in another system there. Of course, if you just go for one integrated ERP package, as we said, the integration is no issue. Everything is nicely aligned, both at the technology and semantics level. Of course, business IT alignment might be challenging. If you go through this functional fit analysis, you might end up in a situation where you need to adapt your organization in a lot of places. If you, on the other hand, go to the best of breed, you might actually have a better business IT alignment without too many customizations, because you go for a better business IT alignment while still having standard packages, an ERP package combined with a supply chain management system or a customer relationship management or an HR management system. You connect those systems. If you're lucky, there's a standard way of interchange. There's a standard interface, if you're lucky. If not, you need to develop it yourself. But you allow yourself to use the strengths of those multiple vendors and to use their best practice to combine them. But of course, again, this integration issue might be complex. If it's already up there and available, very good. If not, you will need to do it yourself, technology, semantics, and you will see it as a recurring cost. Just like the customizations, it shows up at every update. The same goes, so in terms of functionality, you can say I do all the activities of Porter's value chain except one or two. You can also have variability in terms of the division that you are working in. So it might be that you say, well, I'm a multinational. I have locations, I have offices in many places around the world. And in the US, they work differently than in the EU. Or in Asia, they work differently than in the EU. And so you say, well, either I can have one standard approach for everyone. So no exceptions. Everyone does the same. No, then of course you don't have any integration issues because you have one thing that's used by everyone. It's easier to control, but you might have the complaint that they say, but listen, this is not how we do it in the States. This is not how we do it in Asia. Well, then you either, again, need to deviate your system or your own practices. Or you might allow, and you might say, well, no, we allow different variants for different departments, different locations. Of course, alignment will be easier. You will have one part which is more aligned to the US way of working, to EU working, to Asia way of working. But you will need to integrate those different variants, of course. You might ask also yourself the question, but what's the benefit again of adopting an ERP package when you say that you will not use the standard best practice way of working? So you should really carefully make that balance. And to reflect upon yourself, to which extent can we then still fully capture the benefits of an ERP system? The idea of an ERP system was, again, to have best practices and integration. So the more you go into exceptions, the more you deviate from that. Yeah. And then to end, as I already mentioned several times, you have updates, and those are very costly. So that means that those ERP packages and that alignment problem that I indicated in the first lecture, from strategy to bits and bytes, from strategy to zeros and ones, that's a very big bridge, and it's a very big alignment problem. You might use ERP packages to help you in doing that, but this alignment issue, adapting your processes, adapting your software, whatever, it's not a static thing. You might achieve it in the beginning, hopefully, if you're already able to do that. That's already very challenging, but that's not the full challenge. Afterwards, things evolve. Your company evolves. Maybe you have new products, maybe you have new processes, maybe you have new competitors, and so on. You need to adapt to that. So there's this idea of the agile company. We work in an agile way, we change and so on. But that means if you want to have business IT alignment, if your business changes, that your IT needs to change as well. And that is often very, very difficult. As we said, those ERP standards, they have standard practice. So they're like a little bit rigid because it's the best practice. And so it might also clash a little bit with this idea of having an agile company. I already said before, implementing ERP systems is not a one-stage game. It's for multiple years. These vendors, they might push costly updates to you and thereby have a lot of control, this vendor lock-in ID that comes from there. And then it also means that we have those maintenance issues. We will focus a little bit more about what that means, what Lehman's law means in the context of maintenance in the next lecture, which I think is already on Wednesday. What we see now is that this criticism of rigid, large ERP systems, that is a valid criticism. And we see that a lot of vendors, they try to cope with that by, for instance, increasing the modularization of their software systems, where they say, maybe you should not adapt the whole package. You can have plugins, you can have, or whatever you call it, you have modules or building blocks or whatever. And so throughout the years, we saw several names arriving to it. A few years ago, they called it web services or service-oriented architectures or whatever. We still see that ERP vendors are doing that today. They try to accommodate that problem of being a bit rigid, of having difficulties with adapting over time, or being not so easy configurable, by modularizing their software, by providing fine-grained small building blocks that can communicate, collaborate with one another, and are supposed to be a little bit more flexible. Voila. Thank you very much for your attention. There's one paper attached to this chapter that you are invited to read. There are also reflection questions. Next session is already, I think, next Wednesday. Then we will actually change gears and not talk about which systems exist, but how we can build them, how we can develop them, right? If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or to come forward if the rest wants to leave. But thanks a lot again for your attention, and see you next Wednesday.